Hi, everybody. Welcome to Galactic Wisdom. Thank you very much for being here. My mic is a little out of position because I spilled drink all over my keyboard and desk a couple of days ago and still am readjusting everything. Anyway, okay, so there's some interesting stuff going on at the moment. First of all, I'll let you know that my next tour is being planned right now, and I am going to be traveling around half of the US basically in a couple of months to some key locations around the country that are UFO, UAP, alien related. I will be going to places like Roswell. I'm going to go to Marfa to try and see what's going on with the Marfa lights. If you've ever heard of the Marfa lights, it's like a unusual alien glows that happen in the mountains out there in Texas. I'll be going to Brown Mountain in North Carolina, which is also known for unusual lights there, the Brown Mountain lights. Let's see, I'm heading all over the place. I'll be going down as far down south as Fort Lauderdale and Tampa in Florida. I'll be going further south in Texas than I've been forever. Austin, Texas, Houston. So yeah, keep your eyes open for the upcoming tour events that I'm going to be leading. I have had a few I'm drawn in different directions. I work with different beings, and I sometimes find that they draw me in different places in different directions, and I am being drawn to Las Vegas. I live over 4 hours away from Las Vegas, but 3 or 4 people in the last few days have contacted me who either live in Vegas or who are connected with beings who live in Vegas, tall whites, reptilians. There's a number of different beings that live out there outside of Creech Air Force Base, well, inside of Creech Air Force Base and Nellis. So I will be heading off there. I am jumping in my car in a couple of hours, actually, and driving off to Vegas. So that's the kind of life that I lead. I feel like my tall white friends are guiding me there. And hopefully, who knows, maybe I'll be able to meet with them. I've had some pretty amazing experiences with tall whites in the past out there in the desert. So anyway, today I am going to talk about food, and I am going to talk about good food. What is good food? Well, you know, most people eat food because it tastes nice. That's basically the main criterion that a lot of people have for why they eat the food that they eat. It tastes good. It's can be comfort food. It can, you know, it's obviously there for nutrition and energy as well, but most people just sort of eat what tastes nice, and I suppose that cost is also a factor in there. But when I'm talking about good food, I'm talking about food that is good for everyone. I am talking about food that is good for our bodies, food that is good for our spirits, food that is good for other people, food that's good for the animals on this planet, food that's good for the environment, food that's good for the climate, and food that is good for our relationships with advanced non-human beings. When I talk about good food, that's what I'm talking about. There is, of course, a lot of food out there that people eat that is bad food, that is bad for our bodies. It is unhealthy. It is bad for our spirits. Our bodies and our spirits are both us, and if we damage one or if we harm one, then we're harming the other. There's a lot of food that is bad for other people, because when we eat our food, you know, that food came from somewhere. Where does it come from? Who is harmed in the process of that food getting onto your table and into your mouth? and other people sometimes suffer because of it. There is food that is bad for the animals on this planet, clearly, obviously. And it's not quite as well known, but there's a lot of food that is bad for the environment and the climate. Did you, for example, know that if you eat foods that have palm oil in them, that palm oil is very likely coming from Borneo, where there are rainforests that are being chopped down to grow palm trees, to get a range of different palm products. One of them is palm oil. And those forests, because they're being chopped down at an alarming rate, they're home to orangutans, the only home to orangutans in the wild. And the orangutans are losing their homes. So, the food that we eat impacts animals. And I'm certain that nobody that watches my show intends harm upon anybody. Certainly not animals, certainly not orangutans. But if we don't know all of this stuff, if we don't know about where our food comes from, then we might be causing harm unknowingly. And I think that's really what this show is about, to try and help people to not harm others unknowingly, and to be good for the world and people and the universe. A lot of food is bad for the environment and the climate. I'm going to talk more about that today. And a lot of food is bad for our relationships with aliens. When I host my contact events, this might surprise some people, and I do lose people from my groups because of this. But when I host contact events, I have a lot of advice and requests for people that attend my events. Come with peace in your heart. Come with the intention of being friends with these beings. Don't show up with weapons. And I ask people not to show up with animal products that they're going to eat. Like if you're just about to contact a different species, if you're reaching out to a different species in a peaceful way, you want to be friends with them. And just before you do that, you start eating another species of non-human intelligence, and you can't eat another species in a peaceful way. It doesn't look so good to these beings. And I know that the stuff that I say turns people away because, people like their food. They like the relationships they have with their food. But I'm going to tell you a lot of facts today that are going to help you to really understand that a lot of the foods that regular people eat, they're classified as carcinogenic. They're classified as harmful. They do harm us. They do harm the environment, and they do not look. It does not look good to the beings that are out there, the non-human beings out there, when we're causing such harm. It makes them think, why would I really want to be friends with that species? So, in this session today, in this podcast, I am going to examine which foods are good for us all, which foods are bad for us all. I'm going to start off by examining which foods are good and bad for the climate. Then I'm going to move on to which foods are good and bad for our own personal health. You may want to listen to this because most people die in the US because of bad food choices. And I'm going to show you those figures in a minute. And if you want to live, then understanding which foods to avoid may be beneficial to you, because a lot of this stuff is not taught in schools, because there's a lot of misinformation taught in schools, in science lessons, in food and nutritional lessons, that people didn't know just 20 years ago. Anyway, I'm also going to talk about which foods are good and bad for the animals on this planet. Let's start with the subject of climate change. Now, I've talked about climate change a number of times on this show, but I'm going to go into an area of climate change cause today that you may not have heard about before. There are two main causes of global warming and climate change. The fossil fuel industry, which I've had a whole podcasts in the past about, and also the meat and the dairy industry, otherwise called animal agriculture. Now, I have explained in the past how the burning of fossil fuels releases huge amounts of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In this session today, I'm going to explain how huge amounts of another greenhouse gas, methane, is released by both the fossil fuel industry and the meat and the dairy industry. And I've got some images that I'm going to share with you. There are two good places where you can go to get the information that I'm showing people today. One of those places is the Environmental Protection Agency. One is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. In this image here, I show that of the carbon dioxide that is produced. These are figures for the US, and these are figures for the US of the most recent year, where all the figures are currently available. And on the CDC, or Environmental Protection Agency website, I think it's the latter, these figures are for 2022. And you can see that of the greenhouse gases that are emitted in the US every year, about 80% of the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide. And I'm going to talk today about the methane. That's CH4, one carbon with 4 hydrogen atoms around it. CH4, I'm going to talk about the methane today, and about 11% of the emissions from the US are methane. Now, some people might think, well, methane clearly isn't that important if it's only 11% of the greenhouse gas emissions. However, here's a fact that a lot of people don't realize. Methane is about 84 times stronger, 84 times stronger at warming the atmosphere than carbon dioxide is. Therefore, the component of our day-to-day greenhouse gas emissions in the US that's causing the greatest immediate increase in global warming is methane. There's something you may not know already. Now, I've got another graph which I haven't added to my list of graphs for today, but if we look back at the methane emissions over the last 10,000 years, then the methane emissions, well, they go down a bit, they sort of steadily creep back up when the human population increases a bit. But then in the last 100 years, the methane emissions go like that. The methane emissions, the amount of atmospheric methane, the concentration of atmospheric methane does the same thing, like that. And it goes up from approximately 5 to 600 parts per billion in the atmosphere. And it basically triples up to about 1,800 parts per billion. The amount of methane in the atmosphere has pretty much tripled in the last 100 years. That is significant, and that's important. And as I've explained before, this is important because methane is a greenhouse gas. What does that mean? When methane is in the atmosphere, it acts like a blanket around our planet. That blanket lets a lot of the sunlight into the Earth. It warms up the Earth. The Earth re-emits that energy as infrared or heat radiation up into the atmosphere. But then the methane stops it, and it radiates it back into the planet. So carbon dioxide and methane, they are both greenhouse gases that are causing our planet to warm up. But methane is 84 times stronger than carbon dioxide. So methane is the biggest problem we have right now on this planet with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so let's take a look at this graph here, a different graph. What is it that causes the methane emissions? Well, what have we got in there? In this graph, we have something called natural gas and petroleum systems, 28%. That's the fossil fuel industry. Also, we have coal mining in there. Coal mining, that's the fossil fuel industry. We're talking oil, coal, and natural gas. And those add up to, if you do the math, 34% of the emissions of methane in the US. And the figures are pretty much the same all around the world. But then we have this other, what's this orange thing? It says enteric fermentation. Well, somebody could probably look at this graph and think enteric fermentation. Okay, well, I don't know what that is, but I'm not responsible for it. Well, actually, you might be, because enteric fermentation is the posh name for the digestive processes that are going on inside the digestive systems of all of the cows and pigs and goats and mammals that we raise for food on this planet. So enteric fermentation, that's 29%. No, that's 25%. And then we also have manure management, 9%. That manure is the manure from the animals. So also 34% of the methane gas emissions in the US and around the world are caused by animal agriculture and the meat and the dairy industry. So 34% are caused by the meat and the dairy industry, 34% are caused by the fossil fuel industry. And that adds up to approximately nearly 70%. That's most of the methane emissions. So if we want to do something about the methane emissions that we are causing or others are causing out there, then not only should we start considering what can we do to cut down on the burning of fossil fuels, both as a country, as individuals, and as a planet, but what can we do to cut down on the raising of animals for food on this planet? Now, right here, right now, I lose a lot of people. And I lose a lot of people because a lot of people would prefer for the earth to grow hotter and hotter and hotter and burn, for all the species on the planet to die, and for our planet to become uninhabitable than to give up meat or dairy on their plate. And that's something that we all need to decide. I can tell you what I think is the morally right thing to do. And I'm going to give you some reasons, personal health reasons, for considering some of these options. But because the message that I'm giving is not a message that a lot of people want to hear, are open to hearing, then there's only going to be a limited benefit to me producing this podcast. But I have to tell you what is true. That's part of who I am. So I've talked about the climate a little bit. Let me talk a little bit about how animal agriculture is devastating our planet. Meals that we eat that contain meat or dairy produce up to 60 times, it's actually can be higher than that, 60 or 70 times more greenhouse gas emissions than a plant-based meal of equivalent nutritional value. Which means if people were to go vegan or cut down on their meat a lot, a person can slash their personal contributions to climate change to about a 60th of what it was before. That's a pretty big contribution to combating climate change. And it's very easy to look online, and I don't think I have the images of it here, but you can look online and see lots of graphs that show that different types of meat and dairy, they all have a much higher greenhouse gas emission footprint than any plants. And that's kind of obvious because animals take a lot more energy and plants to produce. If you remember in your lessons at school when you were learning about ecology, and maybe you learnt about food chains, and you start off always with a producer or a plant or something photosynthetic, like 99.9% of the time, you start off with plants. And you need a certain amount of land to grow those plants. Now, you could just eat the plants because they've got everything in them that you need. You could just take that energy. Or you could grow hundreds of times more plants than you're going to eat and feed all of those plants to an animal that you intend to eat one day. And in that process, it's like a really steep, shallow gradient pyramid like this. You need a huge number of plants to feed just one or two animals over the course of their lives. So you need a huge area of land to feed just one animal that you're going to eat in a year or two. There is huge energy wasted, therefore, because nothing is 100% efficient. And when you eat a plant, not all of the energy ends up inside you. A lot passes through, a lot goes to waste. And it's the same with any animal. And then when you eat that animal, there's a huge energy wastage as well. So you can imagine that the farm equipment to grow just the plants that you're going to eat is going to be a lot less than all of the farm equipment, the agricultural equipment, to grow all of the huge area of land of plants that are going to then be shipped, processed and shipped to the animals that you're going to eat. And then those animals also need their own equipment and their own care over years, often several months or years. And so the carbon footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions in the production of any meat product is way larger than any plant-based meal. There are good, very, very good aspects to adopting a more plant-based lifestyle, and I'm going to talk to you about those very soon. A lot of people don't realize that the meat and the dairy industry is the leading driver of deforestation and loss of land and biodiversity all around the world. The leading one, because the animals that we eat require huge amounts of plants to eat, huge amounts of land to grow on. We're losing rainforests, not because huge numbers of people want to live on that land, but because we're cutting down the rainforests so that we can grow controlled plants that are going to be fed to all of the animals that we eat. About half of the fertile land on this planet is now farmland. I bet you didn't know that 70% of the mass of birds on this planet are now the birds that we eat, mostly chickens. We've taken over the planet for our meat and dairy industry and our fossil fuel industry. Humans account for over 1/3 of the mass of animals on the planet Earth. About 60% of the mammals on this planet are those mammals that are raised for us to eat. That only leaves about 4% of the mammals on this planet are those mammals that are left out there in the wild, from squirrels and mice all the way up to dolphins and whales. Only 4% of the mammals on this planet are now those animals in the wild. We've taken over nature and converted this planet into a meat and dairy producing machine at the expense of nature. These are facts that people generally are not taught, but they are facts. I don't deal with beliefs. And if you want to learn more about this subject, go and watch David Attenborough's A Life on This Planet on Netflix. That's kind of an enlightening show. I will tell you a little bit about my food journey before I talk about health, because I'm going to talk about health in a little bit, and my podcast today, when I start talking about health, might be enough to save your life. I'm going to make it clear. I'm going to make it blunt. It might be enough to save your life. When I have given this talk to people in the past, I have had hundreds of people message me afterwards and say, Rupert, you just saved my life. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey to lead into that. I grew up in England consuming large quantities of meat and dairy every day. It was a big part of who I was. When I say large quantities of meat and dairy, I'd drink a couple of pints of milk a day. When I had a meal, I would have like 4 slices of toast with a 4-egg omelette with fried spam in there. I mean, I was a big meat eater. I would eat like half a chicken at a time. I was a big meat eater. I loved all different types of meat. I still love the taste, but that was who I was. So when I eventually decided that I needed to go, well, initially vegetarian for moral reasons, which I'll talk about later, it was a very hard thing for me to do, to make that change. One of the things that made that transition hard for me was that I had been taught that we all need to eat meat and dairy to maintain healthy bodies. However, it turns out that what I had been taught about food was not true. So let me show you something that you can find easily if you go to the CDC website. This is a list of the top 10 leading causes of death in this country. I'm going to take a sip of my hot chocolate coffee mix. You can see that most people in the US, and this is actually true for most people around the world, for most countries around the world, most people in the US die of heart disease. Then second to that, we've got about 600,000 die of cancer. So heart disease and cancer, those are the 2 main ones. Collectively, that's about that's about 1,300,000 people. What am I talking about? My mind's gone south. It's 1,300,000 people a year die of heart disease and cancer, and that's more than all of the other combined together if you add them all up. You've got things like accidents in there, which clearly is not food related, but then you've got a little lower down stroke, which is actually food related. A lot of people don't realize this. Diabetes is food related. 5, we got liver disease and things like that at the bottom. 5 out of 10 of these, if you look into them, are directly related, directly caused by food choices. And 4 out of the other 5 are indirectly caused by food choices. It's only accidents that are nothing related to food at all. So let us start with heart disease, because anybody watching this show, that's probably, if we're talking statistics, that's probably going to be the way that you're going to die. That's the most likely way that people are going to die. So let me talk about heart disease. Cardiovascular disease is caused by too much cholesterol in the blood. Cholesterol is a waxy fat-like substance that can build up on the inside walls of our blood vessels, along with fat and calcium and other substances found in the blood. And that those buildups restrict the flow of blood. And obviously we need our blood to carry oxygen around our bodies. So when we start restricting our flow of blood to different places, we're depriving our muscles of the oxygen that they need, and they can malfunction. They can go wrong. And if your heart malfunctions, that's a heart attack. These sticky buildups are called plaque. And when plaque builds up in your arteries and your veins and your capillaries, it's called atherosclerosis. This can happen in any blood vessel anywhere in your body. When it happens in your heart, it's called coronary heart disease. Okay, so where does the cholesterol in our blood come from? Well, there are 2 places it comes from, 2 sources. It comes from our livers, which our livers make cholesterol. It also comes from the food we eat. Let's talk about the liver first. Our bodies need cholesterol as a structural component of our cell membranes. This is true for humans. It's also true for animals, any animal in the animal kingdom. our livers make all of the cholesterol that we need out of the saturated fat and trans fat that we eat. So where does the cholesterol come from? It comes from our livers, and our livers make it out of saturated fat and trans fat. So if we eat too much saturated fat or trans fat, our livers will make too much cholesterol and they will put that into our blood. Okay, so cholesterol is the enemy here. Keep that in your minds. Where else can cholesterol come from? We can eat it. When we eat cholesterol in our food, that is called dietary cholesterol. Now, we don't need any dietary cholesterol because our livers make all of the cholesterol that we need. So all of the cholesterol that we eat is effectively extra, surplus to our requirements. Where does the cholesterol come from in our food? What kind of food does cholesterol come from? Well, remember, cholesterol is something that is needed in the cell membranes of all animals and humans and everything in the animal kingdom. The place that we get cholesterol from is meat and dairy foods. In all of the cells you eat, if you eat a cell of animal or drink a cell of animal, there's cholesterol in there. There isn't any cholesterol in plants or plant-based foods. So if you would like to eat less cholesterol, eat less meat and dairy, because that's where you're getting your cholesterol from. Now, not all meat and dairy products are equal when it comes to cholesterol. Some things are very rich in cholesterol. Some meat and dairy products don't have much cholesterol in them. But you know, I'm vegan. I eat plant-based food diet. If you go rummaging around in my cupboards looking at the food packets, look at the nutritional information. A lot of people are not used to looking at the nutritional information on food packages, but you can do it. And you can do it online. Where do you like shopping? Dillon's, Albertsons, Target. Go online to their websites, search for the foods that you buy, and pull up the nutritional information. It's there for most of those shops online. See how much cholesterol is in there, because well, you don't need to eat any of that cholesterol. And if you look in at my food packets, you will see that zero cholesterol. Let us jump now to the fifth leading cause of death, which is strokes. Now, there are different reasons for strokes, but a very large number of strokes are caused by exactly the same thing that causes cardiovascular disease. It's caused by having too much cholesterol or fat or plaque in our blood vessels. If the blood vessels in our hearts become too clogged up, you get heart attacks. If the blood vessels in your brain become too clogged up, you get a stroke. That's what a stroke is. So if anybody would like to reduce their risk of having a stroke, they could eat less cholesterol or less saturated fat and less trans fat, which is often made into cholesterol. That can be achieved by eating less meat or dairy. Okay, now let us look down. What have we got here? We've covered heart disease, we've covered strokes, and less meat and dairy are very helpful in those situations. How about cancer? Okay, well, here's something that people may not realize. You can go to the World Health Organization, and indeed any government agency, including the CDC around the world, and you can see that red meat and processed meat, that's what the title is here, but in fact it's all meats to some extent. Red meat and processed meats are classed as carcinogens, products that cause cancer. Did you know that? Processed meats are in the same, red meat and processed meats, they're in the same category for carcinogens as cigarettes. And you have to have warning labels on cigarettes that these things cause cancer. they don't put the warning labels that the meats that people eat cause cancer, but they do. And why why don't they give us those warnings? You know, we're not allowed to learn this stuff. This is information that is hidden from people throughout the world, because the meat and the dairy industry has huge power, just like the fossil fuel industry does, and they don't want us knowing these things. And they lobby governments, and governments receive money from the food and the dairy industry and the fossil fuel industry. You know, the meat and the dairy industry and the fossil fuel industry, they're both subsidized by taxpayer money. We give huge amounts of money to those industries, and that's because of the governments decide they want to support that. Government organizations that are there to try to monitor what is healthy in our food, those agencies, those organizations are often, they have board members on those organizations who are active members of the meat and the dairy industry. There's so much darkness and corruption in even developed countries today. It's really quite astonishing. But you can go out there and find the information, even on government websites. You can see images like this that show that, let's see, different countries here have different per capita daily meat consumption in grams. And look at the US. The US is right out here, nearly at the end. Only New Zealand is up there that eats more meat than we do in the US. And look at how this correlates, in this case, to colon cancer incidence. There is a clear line there that shows a correlation between the meat consumption and the amount of colon cancer. Well, how about things like breast cancer? Same thing. Oh, this is milk production, because, you know, milk has carcinogens in it also. We've got more cancer graphs there. There's many different types of cancer, many different types of meat and dairy, so there's a lot of different graphs out there. But all of this is stuff that is known. This is just a general graph that shows that when you increase your meat consumption, you increase your chances of dying, your mortality rate. You have here articles, dairy products linked to an increase in cancer. This, you can go and search this stuff. This is out there. This is knowledge. This is knowledge from scientific studies. There is a protein called casein, which is the main protein in milk. And that casein, when you feed it to rats and mice that have been, you know, in labs, and they rather unethically have been given cancer, the casein turns on the cancer cells, and the cancers multiply and spread. You stop feeding the mice casein, and the cancers stop, their growth stops. You can turn on cancers, you can turn them off, just with casein. This is a simple fact that, you know, I've known a lot of people who have got cancer in my life, and many of them have died. Lots of them have had to have different parts of their bodies cut off in order to get rid of those cancers. And I have tried cautiously to go up to them and say, hey, listen, did you know that milk and dairy products, they contain casein, which turns on cancer? And they're like, you asking me to give up cheese? No, I'm dying. I'm not going to give up cheese. Cheese helps me keep going. And then 3 months later, they're dead, or 3 months later, they have to have another part of their body cut off. You know, I'm trying to teach people how to save themselves, and I apologize if I getting a little emotional in here, but these are studies that are real. This is science that is recognized as being true. There are strong correlations between the consumption of meat and dairy and the risk of getting cancer. And so if anybody would like to reduce their risk of getting cancer, they could eat less meat and dairy. Now, there are lots of different causes of cancer. It's not just the food we eat. You can get cancer from smoking, from ultraviolet light, from formaldehyde in furniture. There's lots of different ways. I once visited a nuclear power station back in England, and a lecture that I was given there on radiation, which causes cancer, nuclear radiation. They said, you know, even if there's a difference between if you take a shower and if you take a bath, because there's like aerosols going on when you take a shower. They're put into the air around you, even though it's just water, and that you get a slightly higher dose of radiation. Don't stop showering, anybody that's out there. We need to shower and we need to bathe. But I'm just illustrating. There's lots of different causes of cancer, but there has been, in the 70s, it was recognized that there's a cancer epidemic, a ridiculously high rate of cancers that's increasing, and that rate of cancer is increasing, or it increased historically when we started eating more and more and more and more meat, more and more and more and more dairy. Okay, so here's some big questions, because a lot of people out there will be saying, but don't we need to eat meat for the protein? Because that's what we're taught in school, right? Well, no, we don't. In spite of us being taught that in school, that's actually not true. Plants contain protein. And unless a person eats a very strange diet of just kind of sugar or cocaine or something very minimal that is plant produced, almost any plant diet is going to contain all of the protein that anybody needs. And again, look at the nutritional information. Somebody asked me this question the other day, and I went online with them. I shared my screen and I looked up. These are real burgers that you can buy from, I can't remember where it was, Dillon's or Albertsons or somewhere. Something like 18 grams of protein in each burger. And then I pulled up Impossible burgers, which are delicious. And to me, they taste just like meat. I can't taste the difference. Impossible burgers, they had 19 grams of protein in them. You can get all the protein you need from plants. And sure, some plants are higher in protein than others. But if you just eat regular meals without even thinking about, how am I going to get my protein in this meal? You're going to get all of your proteins just normally. There are an increasing number of very strong and healthy athletes who are going vegan. Some stage recently, the strongest man in the world was a vegan. High performing martial artists, like the top martial artist in the world at one point, he was vegan. Arnold Schwarzenegger went vegan. James Cameron, he's not an athlete, but James Cameron, his wife came to him. James Cameron, as in Titanic, Avatar, True Lies, Aliens, Terminator. His wife went to him after she had watched a vegan documentary, and she showed it to him. She showed him all of the environmental consequences of eating meat and dairy. He turned to her and he said, okay, let's go vegan now. They went vegan. Then they opened up some schools for children with only vegan menus. And then he went out and he produced a documentary that you should watch that is called The Game Changers. And it shows some of the fittest, healthiest men and male and female athletes who try going vegan and see if it helps or hinders them. And in every single case, it helps them. But don't we need the calcium? Don't we need to drink milk for the calcium? No. Human beings didn't evolve needing to drink the milk of another species. In fact, it was only about 2,000 years ago that the ability to digest milk in humans became common in Europe. Only 2,000 years ago. That's when we evolved the ability to be able to digest milk. We didn't need it before that. We still don't need it now. And in today's world, 65% of humans still haven't evolved that ability 65 approximately % of humans on this planet are still lactose intolerant. And yet all of the food that's being pushed upon us, for any ethnic background, for any genetic composition of a person, whether we can digest milk or dairy products or not, milk and dairy products are being pushed on us. And it's causing huge amounts of ill health on this planet, huge amounts of breast cancer, huge amounts of every cancer, huge amounts of all-round suffering because we can't digest it, stomach problems and aches and digestive issues. We do not need to drink the milk of another species for the calcium. In fact, it's been shown that I don't have the graphs here, but you can go out and watch the documentaries, that the countries that drink more dairy milk have a higher rate of bone weakness and bone injury because something in the dairy. What have you got? You've got lactose, you've got lactic acid. It's acidic, and it actually weakens our bones to drink this stuff. So any dairy product is a carcinogen, and it's not good for our bones. And we're not being taught this stuff. You know, there was a big push a few years ago to try to get doctors, medical doctors in the US to, when they go to medical school, have more lectures on food and nutrition. But you know what? That's preventative. And that's not what the medical industry wants doctors to learn. They don't want doctors to learn how to tell people how to prevent the illnesses and the diseases, the health problems that are pouring money into the health industry. Our planet is messed up in so many ways. So I could carry on down the list of leading causes of death and explain how some of the other ones are also caused or supported by the consumption of meat and dairy products. However, I'm going to move on. It's kind of obvious now, or at least I've talked about how meat and dairy foods are bad for the climate, they're bad for the environment, they're bad for our own health. Now I'd like to talk about something that should be obvious to us all, but very sadly isn't. And that is that killing animals is bad for the animals. Being a good person involves not harming others, but killing animals or paying for them to be killed so that you can eat them. That's harming them. Now, we can only do as much morally as is practically possible. And if we were out in the wilderness trying to survive and food is scarce and the only way to get the food that we need to feed our family is to go and kill an animal, fair enough. Okay. But we have the ability, most of us, to walk into a shop where there's so many different food options that don't involve harming animals or harming our planet or harming ourselves. We can eat food that doesn't harm others. A couple of days ago, I was watching X-Files on Disney Plus, and the adverts came up. And one of the adverts, I won't say for which company it was, but a restaurant chain, and it showed these amazing images of succulent beef, and you know, I like the taste, so it's sort of got me hooked. And it's talking about this beef being responsibly raised beef. If you were to responsibly raise a human child and then kill them for any reason, then the killing of that child would still be morally unacceptable to most people, especially if it was to eat them, but for any reason. How is it wrong to kill animals, but it's okay to kill other conscious life forms? Now, I know that some people are going to have an answer to that. They're going to have an answer that is belief-based or subjectively morally based. But whatever your answer is, the killing of animals is still negative discrimination. You're treating them different from us. It's speciesism. It's inconsiderate. It's selfish, it's unkind. It's not necessary. It's certainly not consistent with my vision of universal peace. It's not peaceful to eat meat or dairy. It's a violent act because you pay for violent things to happen. It's not consistent with universal love or unconditional love. It's not consistent with universal well-being. I could go into how badly animals are treated in the meat and the dairy industry. You know, I've got a couple of minutes left. I will a little bit. If you ever watch videos about how badly those animals are treated, it's appalling. I'm not going to show any of those videos. I'm not going to show any of those images. But let me tell you that in the production of eggs, we need female chickens to lay the eggs. We don't need any of the male chickens. So every year, when they're just a few days old after they've hatched out of their eggs, about 7 billion male chickens are culled. 7 billion male chicks, those cute little yellow things, are culled they put them on a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt drops them into a grinder. Alive, they're dropped into a grinder or a macerator. That's what you're paying for. Even if the eggs are labeled as organic or range-free, that's what you're paying for. In the production of milk, cows are put into things called rape racks. They're forcibly, artificially inseminated. And then when they give birth, you know, they need to go through this process so that they can produce milk. Cows don't just produce milk unless they've gone through a pregnancy. Within 24 hours of the baby being born, the babies are taken away from their mothers. If you've watched the videos of those mothers desperately running after the trucks, the vehicles that have just stolen their babies, you would not drink or eat dairy ever again. And I've pretty much run out of time. So I'm not going to continue with that, but I could. And aliens can see what we're doing to the planet. And they're like, seriously? You're causing this much harm? You're causing holocaustic levels of violence to non-human intelligences on your planet, and you want to be our friends? No thanks. So I've given people 3 reasons today to consider moving towards veganism. And there's really good tasting vegan food. Go and try some. Go to the frozen section of the vegan section in your local food store. Try the Impossible things. Try the Gardein fish fillets and try all of those. There's really good replacements. Try the vegan cheeses. They're good. Almond milk, ice cream. There's so many options. Eating meat and dairy is destroying our planet. It's killing animals. It's immoral to those animals. It's causing climate change, and it's causing most people to die many years before they need to die. I hope you'll consider the things that I've talked about today. I wish you all peace, love, and happiness. You all take care. Goodbye for now.